Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another very special edition of WOWSA Live. We're here with our host, Ned Dennison.
Hello, everyone. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. For the past months, we have been interviewing a lot of honorees who are already in the hall. For the next little while, we get to talk to some folks who have just been selected and will be inducted shortly. So congratulations, Julian Critchlow, honor administrator from Great Britain. You're going to be one of our newest inductees. Say hello, Julian.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be inducted. I'm thrilled to be in such esteemed company.
I'm going to just give some of the highlights of Julian's career. He is the man who's put together the first comprehensive list of English Channel solo swimmers. There are a couple of different federations. There were some historic swims. There were some swims done before the federations kind of took hold. And now that Julian has this list, it's actually a database, he can ask and answer all sorts of metrics. And I think, Julian, I'll take a little bit of wind out of your sails, but one of the reasons Julian started it was he wanted to know, well, what number swimmer is he? And then other metrics, higher success rate, men or women, spring or neap tides, what's the best month, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Julian has also swum the English Channel 4 times and has raised nearly $200,000 for charity. So Julian, do talk to us about that initial research, the joys, the tribulations, the sources, the secrets.
Yeah, so I swam the channel first in 2004. I took a sabbatical from work and devoted 8 months. It was only a 5-month sabbatical, so shows how slow a swimmer I am. But when I got to the other side and I began celebrating, I was very, very excited about being in the published at that time book of swims, which was the CSA handbook. And I quickly looked up my number. I think it was 707. But then I noticed in the tables that the solo swims one way were separated from the solo swims in the opposite direction, and some people one swimmer started with a 2-way swim, so they weren't included in my list, and obviously people like Mike, Alison, and Kevin had done multiple swims. So when I actually asked the question, so what number swimmer am I? How many individuals have actually swum the channel, and which one am I? It wasn't possible to answer. So my first step was just to take all the data that was available out there and start putting it in. And then I began to notice there were quite a few anomalies. The records obviously were particularly poor during anything from during the war. A lot of the records, the CSA wasn't recording swims at the same frequency. And then post-war, when a lot of the swims were done through the channel races, through the Daily Mail, Butlins swims, there were a huge number of swimmers doing it, but they weren't being picked up by the records. So they got into different publications, and there was a lot of kind of informally observed swims where a boat that was on a CSA swim might then subsequently take somebody that wasn't a CSA swim, but under the same conditions. So once you began to get into this, it became a kind of long, nearly 16 years now of just following up every single swim and getting really quite obsessive about in which order did they actually land and become a channel swimmer, because that's the gold standard in my opinion, and a lot of the records, when they actually walk out of the water, they become a channel swimmer. That's the order in which the channel swims are completed in my mind. And so I wanted to know exactly what time swimmers finished. And obviously some of the races, they all started at the same time, so it was easy to know based on the length of their swim who finished first. But in many cases, the records aren't actually necessarily in the right order on the published database because they're done by observer reports. So it was all a case of tracking down every swimmer, establishing their start time and their finish time, reordering the data. A lot of the swimmers' names were spelt differently in the records. So many of the Egyptian swimmers were called different, the same person was called different things. And so they looked like they'd swum 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 different swimmers, but it was actually the same swimmer doing it 4 times. So sorting all of that out meant that now the database is pretty stable. It's particularly stable in the most recent swims because nowadays the records have much more data in, so you can actually establish very clearly who touched France. Obviously, it is France now rather than England because the banning of France-England swims. But you can actually establish it in much more granular detail. But then people began to ask, what nationalities people were, and all those kind of questions, which are obvious questions. Am I the first person from South Africa to have done it, or South Africa to have done it breaststroke or backstroke? So you then begin to kind of pursue that, and you learn all about the UN and all the different country names and the countries that have split up and come together. So there's a lot of sensitivity, and then there are people who are dual nationals, who were born one nationality but then converted. Yes, Ned, it's so you add an extra column for those people, Ned, and so on. So it's a lifelong journey, but the database has become now pretty stable, so that I do publish on my blog. I say that if you're going to have your number tattooed onto your arm or your leg, then I take no liability for it changing subsequently, because I have done that a couple of times when people have spotted. But the numbers, as I say, once it gets to the end of the season, the numbers are reasonably stable now, maybe plus or minus one. The occasional late observer report comes in and switches it. So the answer was I wasn't the 707th person. I was actually the 738th person to have swum the English Channel, as far as I can figure out. And I continue to delve into the old records, and but so far I've not found any new swims for quite a while.
And Julian, you're trying to actually contract every living English Channel swimmer and get them to look at their vellum or certificate and try to come back to you to confirm the information. I know about 6 months ago, I think it was Barry, we had a situation where he actually sent in a copy of his vellum, which was different than your database, which you obviously quickly changed.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The records are pretty unreliable, to be honest, in general. So and actually swimmers' memories are pretty unreliable. Last week I had one swimmer who I contacted who said, yeah, no, I definitely swam on that bank holiday on the Monday, I think it was. And I said, well, I don't think so. I think you swam on the Wednesday. But no, he checked his certificate. It was definitely the Wednesday. So memories fade over time, and things change. But in general, people remember the events of the day pretty vividly, even when they are. I mean, I've had some great correspondence with some of the great names in channel swimming way back in the kind of early days of it, when, as I say, the Butlins Daily Mail swims were on, and people have sent me their kind of life histories, and I'm beginning to collect those, and I'm looking at ways to kind of capture those stories, because they are phenomenal. And the big days when people have done, like Sarah Thomas's four-way swim, these are landmark days, similar to when Webb set out and did it the first time. It showed what is the art of the possible, and I find those stories fascinating. So I like to contact every swimmer. I like to get all the information from them. They usually remember their birthday slightly better than most. I don't publish that, but I do collect it because people like to know how where are they in the age spectrum? Am I the oldest, the youngest, etc. And even from that, I found that the calculating of age is an interesting problem. I mean, obviously you should do it in days, but most people quote it in years and days. And obviously, if you have different number of leap years, that can make a difference in how many days old you are. So even just publishing the date order, the age order, is a major activity, and it also requires me to know the date of the swim as well as the date of birth.
I presume you've adjusted if they were born in Australia compared to born in San Francisco.
That I haven't had any close run things yet, but I'm sure that somebody will query me. I get a lot of very, very random queries, particularly actually more recently on relays, which I do actually have the database ready, I've put all the data into the databases for relays. But because relays obviously have, on average, on a standard relay, 6 people, the complexity of the task is 6 times as much to actually collect all birth dates, nationalities, etc. So I've been kind of holding out to publishing that one until I've kind of got the solo swimmers completely stable. And also when I can extract the individual. By individual is obviously when I want to be able to publish the data, so that the individuals can then link to, a lot of people did relays before solo swims. So
in fairness to Julian and for people listening, there are often requests that I get for statistics that are never going to be available. So for example, was I the first person from Berlin to swim the English Channel? Well, what does from Berlin mean? Does that mean somebody was born in a Berlin hospital and their parents moved to Austria 20 minutes later? Does it mean they've lived in Berlin their entire time? Did they go to university there for a few years, or were they living there for the 1 year, 2 years, 3 years they trained for the channel? So your database will have a nationality, and it may have had a where you're from. But you're at the country level typically, not
typically at the country level, yeah. And occasionally I get questions which are really, really interesting, and then I do actually add the data. So one of the questions I got was, this question of neaps versus spring tides, and which is the best tide to swim on. And the generally accepted wisdom was neap tides are, what everybody aims to be on. There's less tidal flow, it's less, it's easier to, in theory to plot your course across the shortest distance to Cap Grenade. And therefore, everybody wanted to know, well, is that true? Is it true that we have better success rates on neaps? Is it quicker on neaps because you can aim for that shortest point? And when you begin to look at the data, you first have to be able to establish right back to 1875 which days were neaps and springs, which thanks to Boris Mavra, who gave me some data, I managed to build that database so I could do a lookup for which day it was a spring or a neap. And then you can actually do the analysis. And the analysis says that indeed most people swam on neaps in the kind of middle period of channel swimming, because that was the what people had learnt. But increasingly, as the capacity filled up, neaps versus springs began to balance out. And indeed, last year, before the COVID constraints, when we had the most number of swims, we had more swims on springs than we had on neaps. And so suddenly the tradition had flipped, and actually there's no difference really in the timing or success rates on either. Now, you then have to see if you can extract other factors, like do better people get the first slots and faster swimmers, etc. So you can go into endless detail of analysis. But that's the kind of thing that people are very, very interested in, by age, by nationality, by, is the success rate higher or lower for people if they're slower or faster? When do people quit? All of these types of information. So I publish them all now on the blog, and when I get an interesting question, I like to dig into it, research it, and see if I can do a kind of little infographic to bring it alive. One of my favorite stats is the male-female stats, which if you look at it, it's the female success rate in as far as the data can show in the last, say, 7 or 8 years has been higher than the male success rate, just slightly, but twice as many men do it. So obviously twice as many men set out, but women are obviously hold, as Alison Streeter, the queen of the channel, holds the record for the most swims. There's a fairly good basis to assert that women have a slightly better record than men, but men try it twice as often. So I find that an interesting stat. Comment on life.
For all the listeners out there, we are, I think all three of us, I'll certainly speak for Stephen, we are absolute history junkies. We treasure every bit of history. Recently, one of our executive team members, Richard Boer from the Netherlands, picked up 5 scrapbooks from Herman Vilmsey, the class of 1964, one of the original superstars from the Hall of Fame. And those records are all in Dutch. He's busy scanning them. Herman's got another 10 scrapbooks. And I just spoke to Kevin Murphy, the king of the English Channel, I think is his correct title these days. He's got a garage full of boxes. I asked Kevin if he wouldn't mind scanning them all. I think he hung up on me at that point. But these original swim records are absolutely priceless to the sport, because what happens is an observer report is an original. It gets translated into a certificate, and there's a 1 in 10,000 error rate. That might get translated into a handbook, and there's a 1 in 5,000 error rate. By the time it goes to the media, there's a 1 in 1,000. And if you listen to everybody's social media, there's a 1 in 5 error rate, or whatever it might be. So we're always looking for those original records as much as possible. And I kind of had nightmares that every year 50 boxes of those original records are thrown out because one of the marathon swimmers has passed away, and his kids are going, okay, it's his airplane ticket from Buenos Aires to Cairo from 1953. Hardly looks like a family heirloom to us.
Yeah, the one of the most common observer errors I find in the records is French English time. So there's quite a few swims that are uncertain by 1 hour because the observer report is slightly different, and then you end up doing this kind of Sherlock Holmes detective work of reading the entire observer report to work out exactly how long they were fed each time, to see if you can work out and confirm the exact timing of the swim, and therefore confirm whether it was a 1 hour difference. One of Kevin's swims is exactly in that status, where we still can't quite figure out whether it was 1 hour shorter or 1 hour longer.
I mean, he only did 34 swims. You'd think he'd have that kind of information at the tip of his tongue.
Yeah, well, he was knocking them off at quite a frequency at some points. So it's probably like going out for a sandwich.
So I'm just thinking, if you're using your iPhone as your timing device, as you get closer to France, it probably automatically changes the time on you.
Exactly. You have to, the technology doesn't necessarily help in that regard.
Hey, Julian, what was the most rewarding, this will be my last question for you. What was the most rewarding bit of information you finally got?
I think probably the most satisfying was to talk to some of the swimmers who did the Daily Mail and Butlin swims and get all the spellings correct, particularly on the Egyptian swimmers' names, which, there was a huge number of Egyptian swimmers doing those swims at the time. It was kind of a nationally recognized sport, and they got a lot of plaudits, and there's lots of wonderful photographs of some of the giants of the channel doing that. But as I say, their name was spelt, in very varied ways. And so tracking down every single one of those and trying to get those correct was a bit of a labor of love. Now I've spelt them one way, and other people will spell them other ways, but they're at least spelt consistently between the swims they did.
So I have to say, on the Egyptian names, the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame has a database with one spelling. Your spellings are slightly different. Stephen Munatonis and Open Waterpedia, his are slightly different. And if you look at his articles over the last 15 years, the names have changed as things have come to light. And the Marathon Swimmers Federation will have different spellings as well. And even this morning, we have an honoree that we have called for years, General Omar Sabri, a famous Egyptian. I looked at an old picture today and it said Brigadier Dr. Sabri. So I've sent a question off to Nasser El Shalisi from Egypt to ask his father, Nabil, Captain Nabil, does he have any idea if this guy has a doctorate or not? So we're never actually going to get the real answer, but we'll get closer as time goes on.
Absolutely. And as long as we end up sourcing, it's like genealogy. As long as you source the document, then you can always go back and show your logic for that use.
So Julian, again, congratulations on your honor of joining the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, and mostly thank you very, very much for creating this incredible, valuable historical resource, this database. Well,
thank you. It is a great honor to be inducted, but similar to actually swimming the channel, the database was just done for a labor of love, for my own curiosity, and I'm very thrilled that I end up in a lot of correspondence with lots of swimmers worldwide about the data and about the history of the swims.